Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim Daf Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Hannah and Michael Petrukovsky in loving memory of Tzina Tova Bat Leib Zichronah Lebracha on her 15th year at site today. Today's daf is sponsored by Jerry Goldstein Gudalia in loving memory of Jerry's mother, Helen Sippe Hinda Bat Avraham B'Dvora, and the completion of 12 months of mourning. May her neshama have an aliyah. Okay, I want to get started with a bit more intro. A few things I want to just, first of all, point out to everyone what I always like to point out at the beginning of Masechet, and I know some of you are new, so it's always good to say this, which is the beginning of Masechet is like starting a book or starting a movie, and you don't really know what's going on yet. And if you're feeling like I didn't get everything from yesterday, not to worry. We're going to go through these concepts over and over and over again. And by the time you finish the Masechet, you will know what's going on. Okay, you might not remember everything, but the basic concepts that I went over yesterday, you can even, you might know, those who know me know that I don't love introductions because I find introductions are difficult because you don't get know anything, so it doesn't mean so much. What's even best is to listen to the intro again after, let's say, 10 or 12 days of learning, and then it'll mean a lot more to you, both the introduction to yesterday's class and Ayala Lipson-Hoffman's introduction, which is also gives a very excellent overview. Reading through Gita's introduction will also help you get your concepts down pat. You can actually print it out before Shabbat if you want and read it. These are all very useful tools, but they're much more useful once you're already into the Masechet. Okay, that's my advice. It's hard not to do an intro, but it's also hard to do an intro. It doesn't mean so much. So patience, you'll get there. These concepts will be very clear to you. Okay, I want to just go through a few basics. I also saw some questions people were asking after yesterday's class, so I want to clarify a few things. First of all, I made a mistake yesterday. There is Tosfot here. It's very little, so it's all the way on the side, which makes it for someone like me kind of impossible to try to read. But Tosfot is there on the side of the daf, just in very teeny print. So there's Tosfot on Nedarim. It's just not in its normal place. I looked up a little more about Rashi. Somebody asked who is the author of the Rashi here. So it seems, again, nobody really knows, but it seems to be attributed to commentary, like rabbis who were all around the time of Rashi living in Ashkenaz, right, in Germany, where Rashi also lived. And that's why it was attributed to Rashi, because it's kind of the school of thought of Rashi, but it's not Rashi himself. I want to just remind people, okay, maybe I also didn't specify this. Sometimes I take things as obvious, I try to not, but neder, let's just clarify terminology. Neder is a vow, and that means I vow to forbid something upon me. We talked about it, that it's a isur hefza, as we call it. It's a neder on an object. Okay, this is forbidden to me. I'll give you the best way to remember this. Okay, in the law of sacrifices, I don't know if it's the best way to remember, but it's another comparison of this difference of hefza gavra. In the world of sacrifices, okay, that's the difference between neder and shvuah. Shvuah is an oath, where you say, I swear. Okay, so you already know it's I swear, as opposed to this object is forbidden to me. So how can we remember this? Neder and nidava, this is another difference. There's two types of voluntary offerings. There's a voluntary offering where I say, this animal will be brought as a sacrifice. I'm taking upon myself this animal to bring. Or I can say, I'm taking upon myself to bring a sacrifice. Okay, that's the difference between a neder and a nidava. So a neder goes on the animal. So let's say something happened to that animal and the animal died before I brought his sacrifice. I'm not responsible anymore to bring the korban because it was on the animal, not on me. But if I say I'm bringing a sacrifice, that's a nidava, I'm voluntarily bringing something to the temple, I'm obligating myself, then the obligation is on me. So if something happens to the animal that I designate, I have to find a replacement animal. So it's a big difference if it's me or it's the object. Also, we talked about by oaths and vows, how that would make it different. Right? For example, it affects what you can take a vow about. You can't vow that I won't sleep. There's no such thing, because a vow doesn't go on you, it goes on an object, and there is no object called sleep, not a tangible object. Okay, so that's about the hefza gavra distinction. The last thing I want to talk about before we get started is the idea of kinui neder, okay, that we started with. Kol kinuyei nedarim. Oh, one more thing before we get there. I wanted to talk about the language. I mentioned yesterday about how the language in Nedarim is different. So I did a little more research about that as well. I'm thinking of questions people asked that I wanted to address. One is, people mentioned there's other places Rashi is not Rashi. So as far as I can tell, Masechet Ta'anit Rashi isn't Rashi, and the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, actually it's the 11th chapter. It's in the Mishna, it's the 10th, and the Gemara, it's the 11th, Perek Chelek. Okay, Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chelek Le'olam Haba. So that's Perek Chelek. That one also Rashi isn't Rashi. In terms of difference of style, okay, the language we're going to see in Nedarim is different than the language elsewhere. So first of all, it's similar to the language in Nedarim, Nazir, our next two Masechtot, have this similar kind of strange different language used. Kritu, Tmura, and Me'ila, which is much later on in Kodshim, we'll get there also have a bit of this different in style. Why is there a difference in style? So that in the academic world, there's many different theories about why this is. Was it compiled in a different city? So they had a different dialect. Most people think, or at least the recent, I read someone's summary of their doctorate, they talked about this, and that the style, he claims, is not a difference in the style of writing of that. Okay, they had a different dialect, but it was more, sorry, I said it wrong. It was more the style of writing, that these were written for whatever reason. And there's actually different manuscripts of Nedarim. They don't all have this different language. It's a whole different topic. I don't want to get into it now too much. But he claims that they were particularly written in a different style, more not because it was a different dialect, but they were written in a higher written style, more in a writing style rather than a discussion style. Whereas usually discussion style, this is written kind of in a higher literary, a higher language. The use of language, it's more for written rather than for speaking. Why that is, again, nobody really knows. It's just, it developed in somehow differently, whether it was in a different generation, nobody really knows all of that. But the last thing of intro, which really gets into the content of today's daf, is this idea of kinuyim, okay? Using a different word instead of neder. Why would you do that? So there's two approaches we're going to see. One is there's the approach of sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. You're writing about Rashi and Rashbam and Psachim. So there it's different. They also added the Rashbam. There's also Rashi, and there's also the Rashbam where Rashi normally is. Although there are places where it says Kam Meit Rashi, and then his perush just ends. That's a different thing. We're also just kind of finished, and then Rashi wasn't there to finish up. Okay, fine. Back to kinuyim. Kinuyim are very interesting because what is the idea of a kinuy? There's two approaches, and we're going to see this in the Gemara today. There's Machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Today you won't see them by name, who says what. We'll get to that on Daf Yud. But they're going to make reference to this Machloket in Daf Yud, which is, are kinuyim lashon nochrim, meaning, is it just words that Gentiles use also to say vow, and therefore it's just in the vernacular, this is how people, they're, synonyms or other words used in place of Nedarim. And the whole idea is, what did you mean when you said that? And since it's clear that you meant vow, because that's a word that people use to connote vows, then a kinuy of a neder is going to be just like a neder. The second approach is to say that kinuyim are lashon shebadu lahem chachamim liot noder. The rabbis chose these words, and we're going to see them. They're kind of they all sound similar to words used as vows, but with letter different or something. They're going to sound like some funny words that you might never have heard, or maybe you've heard of them because kol nidre, we say all these words, but they're not really words that you would have heard otherwise. But they're words that the rabbis chose to use, and it seems like as a neder. The rabbis didn't want us to use the language, the word neder. They wanted us to use other words. This is a very strange concept. Why not? If we have a neder, why don't we use a neder? So one option could be, and this is Tosfot's understanding, that if you use a kinuy, your neder is only rabbinic. And they wanted, again, with this fear, we talked about it yesterday, that they really frowned upon Nedarim often. Now, why did they frown upon Nedarim? Because it's hard for people to keep their vows, right? So the rabbi said, listen, instead of saying vow, why don't you just say a different word? And then it'll drop it to a rabbinic level. And then it won't be so as big a deal if you don't keep your word. That's one way of looking at it. Okay. But the Ran says, what are you talking about? If any word is a made-up word, neder is a made-up word, really. In other words, just like language is all made up by humans. So if the rabbis make up words, then they're going to also be no different than if humans make up words in language. So the Ran thinks it's all Torah law. And then you have to question, and I don't have the answer. There are possible ways of looking at why would the rabbis have made up terms in terms of in the Ran's outlook. And maybe, again, maybe there's certain words just have, they wanted to, the same way we don't say God's name, right? We say Hashem. We don't say God's actual name unless we're praying or we're reading a verse or something like that. But we try to avoid, and they treated, it seems like neder in that way. They were kind of scared of saying the word vow. It's like, it sounds very harsh. Even if a kinoi has the same, again, one could say, so stay away from the harsh word, go lower level, it's not as serious. But even if you say it's as serious, still there seems to be this shying away, at least according to that interpretation. But again, there's those two approaches, but shying away from actually saying the word. And if, we said yesterday that starting off with kinuyim is a bit of a strange place to start, but it's not really, because if we talk about what we said yesterday about neder, it's all about what my words can create. That's really the central core issue. And that's why we start off with already, even if you don't use the word of a neder, the kinoi will have the same effect, right? Again, same, maybe incompletely the same, like the Ran says, or same according to Tosso means, well, you have to keep to it, but it's only rabbinic. So these are different approaches that exist out there. With that, we're going to get back to our daf. So the first issue we did, or the issue that we're in the middle of dealing with, is this issue of the structure of the Mishnah. Just to remind you, what we did was we saw our Mishnah. It starts off with kol kinuyei nedarim k'nedarim. Karamim, shvuot, shvuot, right? All names, right? If you use a nickname, a different kind of name, they're going to be treated the same. Then it went to mudrani mimcha, mufrashim mimcha, murchak mimcha, shani ochel lecha, shani to'em lecha, these other languages. And it's not a title sentence, it's details. And then after that, after Rabbi Akiva, I'm going to skip that for right now, but the next Mishnah, just to also make this clear, if we didn't read it inside, next Mishnah, I should have opened it in the book of Mishna, in the Gemara, trying to find where the next Mishnah is, I forget which daf, but the next Mishnah basically lists the types of Nedarim. It's actually, it's two Mishnayot, but after has a small Mishnah about Kinidrei Rishayim, Neder, Nazir. I'm not going to get into that. But then it says on Daf Yud, the Mishnah appears there. It's two Mishnayot after this. Ha'omer konam, konach, konas, hare'elu kinuyim. Likorban cheref, 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 hareza kinuyim l'cherem. Okay, they start listing all the kinuyim. So basically, we have kinuyim. Then, according to the way the Bavli understood it, our Gemara, the next section, mudrani mufrashni, are details of yadot, which are cut off statements, not full. Then we go to explain kinuyim. So the first question was, how did we get to yadot? To which the Gemara says, add some words. It should say kinui is like neder, yadot are like neder. Those are the added words. Then it details yadot, and then it details kinuyim. Now, Gemara struggled with that. Why ABBA should be ABAB? To which they brought other Mishnayot that are ABBA. Then they said, but wait, there's other Mishnayot that are ABCD. Then they said, no, ABCD makes sense. We're going to do ABCD because there's so many. When it's two things, ABBA. Then the Gemara said, and that's where we ended, but there's also ABBA Mishnayot, which is Bamebe Mayotza, Bamebe Mayotza. What will an animal go out with? What can't an animal go out with? And then said an animal can go out with this, which is ABAB. So now we're starting at the top of Gimel. Ella lavdak. So they say the answer I suggested yesterday, which is don't take things so seriously that all Mishnayot have to have the same structure. Zimni nefarisha udapata paresha. Zimni no udasalik nefarish paresha. Sometimes they start detailing what they started with, and sometimes whatever they're up to, they then detail. So don't be so disturbed by this. Some Mishnayot go this way, some Mishnayot go that way. That's a possible answer. This is actually our second answer. Our first answer was, it always does ABBA. They rejected that and said, it doesn't always. Then, okay, so sometimes it does it this way, sometimes it does it that way. The fact that all Mishnayot don't have the same structure shouldn't bother us. Option number 3, Ibait Ema, Yadot, drasha, lahom bereisha. Gemara gives an interesting answer, which actually appears in a lot of other places as well. Something that's learned by a drasha from the Torah. We're going to get to all this soon. How cute, okay? We're going to basically say, kinuyim are learned directly from the Torah, and yadot are learned from a drasha. What drasha? We're going to see. So, and how we know kinuyim are written directly in the Torah, it's also a question. But right now, let's take that as an assumption. Kinuyim are written directly are clear from the Torah. The yadot are from a drasha, meaning they extrapolated something in the Torah. That's always more beloved. When the rabbis say, oh, the Torah says this, we're gonna extrapolate that. They like that because it's their involvement in Torah law. So because of that, things that were learned out by drasha come first. You might say, what do you mean? Shouldn't direct Torah law come first? So we're going to actually come up with a combination in a minute. But this is actually a claim that's used in some places because it's so beloved among the rabbis, because they darshan it, they learned it on their own. Again, even if you're not the rabbi, you learned it on their own. But the idea that it was learned out, that comes first. So that's why they explain it first. So the Gemara says, if so, liftochadim bereisha. They should then start the Mishnah with that. It shouldn't start with kinuyim. It should start with yadot. It should be ABAB, yadot kinuyim, yadot kinuyim. So the Gemara says, miftach patak b'kinuyim deoraita bereisha v'hadar mefarish yadot aten lemidrash. Well, there is this give and take. It is very important kinuyim because they're written in the Torah. So therefore, they come first in terms of topic sentence. But when it comes to explaining, we're going to explain the yadot first. And in that way, we get to have our cake and eat it too, right? We get both to say yadot are important, but they're not so, right? We can't ignore what's explicit in the Torah. So we're going to mention that first, but then explain the yadot first when it comes to the explanation part. Well, hani chalamanda amar kinuyim lashon nuchlim. Where do we get the kinuyim are written in the Torah? Well, if you view kinuyim, and here we get to this machloket I mentioned in the introduction, which is if you view kinuyim as lashon nuchlim, and you say it's just another word used in the vernacular to say vow, then it makes sense that kinuyim are in the Torah, because it says if you take a neder, which means you take a vow, whatever language, right, whatever word you use to take that vow. But if the rabbis made up names, words that you should use when you take a neder, then already it's also rabbinic, and then it's not Torah law. So so how can you explain it according to that? So basically we have, in answer number 3, we have 2 approaches. One is to say that kinuyim are Torah, and that's why we started with them, and that's because it's just another word to connote the same thing. And then you say we start with kinoi, we then get to yadot, then we explain yadot first because they are beloved because they come from a drasha, and then we get back to kinuyim to explain them. But if you hold that they're also something the rabbis made up, then everything's at the same level, and then that answer basically falls to the side. So what are we going to answer according to that? To which the Gemara answers by neutralizing the question. Now, here's a very interesting approach. You have to remember where we came from. The Mishnah never says the words yadot, nedarim, nedarim, right? It never says that. This was what we call a chisurim achasrei b'hachikatani. They assumed, since we jumped right away, again, without the words yadot in the Mishnah, it's actually a very strange structure. Starts off saying, topic sentence, any kinoi is like a, right? Any kinoi of a neder is like a neder. Again, I'm ignoring the shvuel, charamim, and all that, fine. Then it starts giving examples of yadot, and then it gives examples of kinuyim. Again, this is all the way the Bavli understands it. We mentioned yesterday that maybe the Mishnah, actually, those are examples of kinuyim and not yadot, and that's kind of the Yerushalmi's approach. But being within the Bavli's approach, the words yadot are missing here. So what they do, they added them in. Where they add them in? Well, they thought the obvious place to add them in was right before they explain yadot. Here comes the Gemara with something very smart and says, Mi katane yadot. It doesn't even say yadot nedarim kinidarim in the Mishnah. We added it in, and once we added it in, we said now we have an ABBA structure. Why is the structure ABBA? To which the Gemara suggests, right? Let's just continue with the question. Wasn't it just added words? If so, akdim nami. Why don't we add the words in? We added it randomly, right? We decided, it must be missing. Let's stick those words in. Well, akdim nami vitane yadot kol yadot nedarim akdim nami vitane yadot. Why don't you put yadot first, and then you'll have ABAB. Kol yadot nedarim kinidarim v'chol kinuyei nedarim kinidarim. And then it will just read like this. All yadot nedarim are like neder. Any kinoi is like a kinoi. It's like a neder. And then here are the yadot, and here are the kinuyim. And that you have no question at all. Then it's just an ABAB structure, which they seem to think was the most logical structure. And then we resolve the question by actually saying there actually is no question. Okay, so maybe I should spend a minute just explaining, especially for people who are new, this concept of chisur mechasre v'hachi katani. This is a method the rabbis use. When we learn Gemara, what we do often is we take Mishnas, all sorts of things that were from the Tannaitic time period, and the rabbis in the next generations of the Amoraim time period are struggling to understand them. So when they can't understand the Mishnah, they have all sorts of tools at their dispense that they can use to help make the Mishnah make more sense to them. So, but again, you have to remember, they're coming with glasses from their time period, which could be affected by the time period, could be affected by where they're living, could be affected by traditions they have, could be affected by all sorts of things, or just the way they see the truth to be. That's why I specifically showed you that the Yerushalmi doesn't read the Mishnah the way they read it and doesn't have this question at all, because they read the Mishnah differently. They didn't think that those examples were yadot, but the Amoraim thought in Babylonia, thought those words are yadot, struggled with the Mishnah. When you're struggling with the Mishnah, there's all types of methods you can use. One of the methods is to say that since this was orally transmitted, it's very likely that words got lost over time and it wasn't properly transmitted. And then they make corrections. So sometimes the corrections that they make are to say, there's a few words missing and let's add them to make it make more sense. So that's the one. As we go on, we'll see other methods that they use to resolve problems with Tannaitic sources. That's the method they use here. And here it's very funny because they use it. Based on the use of it, they come up with a problem. Then they say, we were adding it anyway. Let's just add it somewhere else. And then we don't have a question at all. That's section 1 of our daf, where we finished the question about the ABBA structure. Again, we ended up with 2 answers. The second answer we had, which also stands, is, and if you look at the study guide, again, if your Hebrew is good enough to follow, there's 3 answers. One from yesterday we rejected. The second from today, which was sometimes uses this method, sometimes it uses that method, and that's okay. Option 3 was to say, because it was learned by drasha, that's why, but that only worked if you hold kinuyim or lashon chachamim. If you hold the lashon shebadu lahem chachamim, you can't use that answer. And then they basically neutralize the question, and there's no question at all, by saying just add the word yadot at the beginning. Okay, that phrase, that topic sentence about yadot, put it in the beginning, and then we don't have a question. Now we want to know, where do we get, so we resolved where kinuyim are from the Torah. Well, that's if you say it's just another way of saying vow, then obviously it's a vow by Torah law. Now the question becomes, where do we have yadot in the Torah? Where's the drasha? So for this, we're going to end up ultimately with 3 answers. Okay, right now we're going to start with the first one. Yadot hechaktiv. Okay, so now where I can't remember if I read this all inside. So again, the Gemara had said, Akdim nami v'tana yadot. So here's the way the Mishnah should read, the Mishnayot coming up. Kol yadot nedarim kinidarim, kol kinuyei nedarim kinidarim, both topic sentences, yadot, kinuyim. Elu hein yadot, haomer lechavero mudrani mufrashni muruchakni, or that was the end of our Mishnah. And then elu hein kinuyim, konam, konach, konas. Okay, that was the ABAB. Now we get to yadot hechaktiv. Where does it say yadot in the Torah? Where do we get this drasha from? So the first answer is pasuk about nazir. Ish ki afli lindor neder nazir lahazir lahashem. A man who expresses with words, that's hafla'ah. Okay, by the way, may as well mention it here. The Rambam has the laws of Nedarim and Nazirut under Sefer Hafla'ah in the Mishnah Torah. It's called the Book of Expressions. Okay, so a person who expresses lindor neder, to make a vow, nazir lahazir lahashem. Okay, a neder of a nazirut, basically, that's what nazirut is, a type of vow. A vow to be a nazir, lehazir lahashem, to be a nazir to God. Now, if you notice here, nazir lahazir is unnecessary to have both. You could have just said lindor neder nazir lahashem, right? To be a nazir to God. You don't need both those words. So Bitanya, and there's a braita on this, and this is a braita that we're going to basically be using for the first part of it, but later we're going to come back and try to figure out the second part of it. It could be the end of today's stuff into tomorrow's stuff. The braita says like this: Nazir lahazil. What do we learn from the double language here and the extra word? La'asot kinuye nazirut kinizirut. To tell you that any other word you use to become a nazir, that's a kinoi of a nazir, another word that's like nazir, kinizirut, is going to be like nazirut. We'll see what words that further on. Yadot nazirut kinizirut, and also not just kinuyim, yadot. Okay, so from the double language they learn, yadot and kinuyim of a nazir are effective. Now that's nazir. We want to find neder. Ainli ala b'nazirut. So classic style of midrash halacha. Okay, that helps me with one, but b'nedarim minayim. But here comes the question: where are we going to get it when it comes to vows? Talmud lamal, because it says ish kafli lindor neder nazir lahazir laHashem makish nazirut lenedarim or nedarim lenazirut. We have what we call a hekesh. A hekesh is a juxtaposition. We have two things next to each other in the verse. We're going to say, what's true for one is true for the other. What's true for the other is true for the one. Okay, we're going to go back and forth. So we're going to learn three things from here. Ma nizirut asabo yadot nizirut kenizirut. Af nedarim asabem yadot nedarim kenidarim. Just like in nizirut, we just learned nazir lahazir, double language, comes to include yadot. So then it's near the word neder. Oh, what we just learned for nazir is going to be true for neder as well. So we basically learn it from a hekesh. Now you might be wondering, I don't know if you're wondering this, but right, it also says ishkafli lindor neder. There's also double language by neder. Why don't we learn for the double language? Hold off on your question if you're thinking that. Okay, we're going to get back to that. Right now they don't do that, and the question is going to be why. But right now we're going to assume we learn it straight from nazirut. So nazirut is learned by this drasha. Nazir lahazir, the double language. From there, we do a juxtaposition, a hekesh, to neder. And that's how we get neder. And that we could end right here. But the Gemara likes when they bring a braita, they bring the whole thing. So the braita continues to do other laws. We're going to learn one from the other. And now we're going to learn, instead of from nazir to neder, we're going to learn from neder to nazir. We saw yesterday one of these, which is if it says lo yachel dvaro, right? You have to keep what you said. You have to do what you said. If you take a vow, you have to keep it. So just like if you don't keep to your word, you've done a negative, you've transgressed a negative commandment in the Torah. Likewise, by nazir, if you don't keep your nazirut, you're over on bal yachem. Okay, that means you've transgressed the issue bal yachem. And even though it doesn't say it by nazir, but even though it doesn't say it, it says it by neder. We're going to learn from hekesh, the juxtaposition. It's true for nazirut as well. Ubebal ta'achir. If you say I'm bringing a vow, I'm vowing to bring something, right? Bring a sacrifice to the temple, and then you don't do it within a timely fashion. There's many opinions. We've seen this issue of bal ta'achir by sacrifices. Is it 3 regalim? Is it a certain 3 regalim? It's a whole debate about that, but not getting into that right now about what it is. But basically, if you delay doing it, you're liable. Nazirut, same thing applies, even though it doesn't appear in the verses by nazir, but because nazir and neder are juxtaposed in the verse, we can learn from nedarim to nazirut. Talked about this a lot before in other masechtot. The father can annul the vow of the daughter, and the husband can annul the vow of his wife. Now that's vows, and it talks about in the Torah about vows. But since we have this juxtaposition of neder to nazir, the woman takes upon herself to be a nazir, the husband or the father can annul her vow. Again, the father only if she's not married. The husband only when she is married, obviously. The husband if not. So anyway, that's the end of the braita. Here comes our question, which I already kind of told you, which is Mishna gabe nazirut, dichtiv nazir lahazir, nedarim nami ktiv lindor neder. The whole drasha of yadot of nazirut came from this double language, which is unnecessary. Also, it's unnecessary language in the beginning of the verse by neder. So why don't you just say lindor neder comes to teach you double language? Yadot of nazirut of neder are like a neder, and therefore you wouldn't need to learn it. Hekesha lamali. What do you need a hekesh for? Right? It's more from the words themselves. Instead of learning it from somewhere else, you should learn it from the words themselves. To which the Gemara answers: Ikatav neder lindor kidekatav nazir lahazir. The words nazir lahazir are unnecessary. So if it had said it like that, neder lindor, a vow to have vowed, that would be, you don't speak that way. Then you'd be right. But that's not what it says in the pasuk. Then lo tzarich hakesh, you wouldn't need the hakesh. Hash dekatav lindor neder. Now, if you speak Hebrew, you'd know that that's what you would say, to vow a vow. Now, it doesn't make any sense in English, but in the Hebrew language, you would do lindor neder. That's how you speak. So, dibra Torah kelishon bnei adam. The Torah is just using a manner of speaking that people speak it. We don't view that as double language. That's just the way you talk in Hebrew. So therefore, it's not open to having a drasha. Okay, so now, again, track number one, I want to make this very clear before we move on. Track number one, where do we learn yadot from? We learn it from nazirut, from a hekesh. Where do we learn from nazirut? The double language. We don't darshan the double language in neder because it's not really double language. That's the way people speak. Comes the Gemara, though, and points out not everybody agrees with this. Hanicha, that makes sense. This is actually a big debate. Do we say the Torah speaks in a manner that people speak, that humans speak? It's written in typical manner, and therefore, if you see this double language, which is a language that normally people speak on the street, that's nothing unusual. But you hold that the Torah does not speak. What does this really mean? When we speak, we sometimes also use unnecessary words. We say things twice, we repeat things. We speak in that way. If you hold the Torah is not written in a language that humans use, and basically, obviously, it's written in the language that we speak, but any extra anything can be darshaned, as we say. You can extrapolate. Then, hi lindor neder, my avidle. Then lindor neder is unnecessary because you could have said it simpler. If the theory of this is anything the Torah could have said simpler and didn't say it simpler, Torah is very deliberately written in a particular manner, is open to extrapolating. So if that's the case, what are you going to do with lindor neder? Maybe you should learn yadot nedarim ki nedarim, and then you don't need the hekesh, and then we're stuck with, why did they do a hekesh here? A juxtaposition. So what do they answer? Darish le la'asot yadot nedarim ki nedarim. Yes, you do in fact learn yadot nedarim ki nedarim. What do we do with the nazirut then? Don't we have a hekesh? We're now reversing what the braita said. This approach would disagree with the braita and would say, instead of we learn it by nazir and from there to neder, we're going to do the reverse. We learn it from neder and from there to nazir. And we're going to be left with why nazir lahazir. What are we going to do with that? So we'll explain that. So now they say, umakish nazirut lenedarim, and now we're going to learn from nedarim to nazirut. That yadot nazir is like a nazir. So now we're left with nazir lahazir. What are we going to do with that? That's for something else. Darish le milamed, they use it to learn. Milamed shanizirut, turning out amabet chal al nazirut. What does this mean? That means if I say I'm going to be a nazir, and then I say again right after I'm going to be a nazir, I've basically taken upon myself 2 naziriyot. Now, what does that mean? So there's a concept that if I didn't specify how long I want to be a nazir for, the stam nazirut, we assume basic nazirut is 30 days. So if I say I'm going to be a nazir, I'm going to be a nazir. That's what's called nazirut chala nazirut. Even though I'm already a nazir, you might say you already said that and you're just repeating and you mean the same thing. The law is, we're going to see, like many things we saw today, it's a subject of debate, But there are those who hold that nazirut is chala nazirut, means I took on one nazirut and then I took on another one. So as soon as the first one ends, the next one will start. And I basically taken on nazirut for 60 days, 2 periods of nazirut for 30 days each. So that's what you learn from nazir lahazir, which actually makes sense. Double language comes to teach you one nazirut can apply on another. So according to option number 2, again, within option number 1 was the Torah speaks kilashon b'nei adam. Neder lahadir, sorry, I have to remember the wording. It's sorry, where is it? Ishki indor neder, kiti dor neder, ishki afli lindor neder. Lindor neder is just normal way of speaking. Nazirut, nazir lahazir is not a normal way of speaking. That we're going to use yadot. From there, we learned to neder. That was option 1, and we're pushing that option aside because we're done with it. We're good. But if you hold the Torah did not speak b'lashon b'nei adam, then we're going to say lindor neder is meant to be darshan, teaches you yadot. From there to nazirut. Why nazir lahazir? Nazirut chala nazirut. Ulamanda amal. But wait, if you say dibra Torah kilashon b'nei adam, the first question is go back to option 1. We're not totally done with it. We did push it aside, but we're going to go back to it for a minute. That drasha has no room to learn nazirut chala nazirut because nazir lazir they're using for something else. The world of drashot works like this. If you use a particular phrase and you darshan it in one way, you can't use it for another drasha. So nazir lahazir in the first interpretation is teaching you yadot nazirut or like nazirut. And if you said a cutoff version of I want to be a nazir, that still works. So now they're going to say nazir lahazir darish le'lasot yadot nazirut kenazirut, and that's busy and used. So nazirut chala nazirut menale. Where are they going to learn nazirut chala nazirut? Now I did tell you it's a machloket. It's a debate whether it is or not. So the easiest answer, hanicha, makes a lot of sense. If you say that the person who held, again, you were going to go like this, the person who held dibra Torah kilashon b'nei adam, right, which would then say yadot nazirut like nazirut from the word nazir lazir, the words nazir lazir, from there to Nedarim, they don't have a drasha on nazirut chala nazirut. So it's very easy. You just say, oh, they don't hold that way. Very simple. But it's not so clear that that's the case. So therefore, the Gemara continues and says, "Ela isfir ale kemanda amal nazirut chala nazirut menale." But we're going to get stuck, right? This is like a flow chart, right? There's option A and option B. You could go this way and say they just don't hold that way. But if you go that way and you say they do hold nazirut chala nazirut, that it will be effective, then, right, again, I just want to be clear. If you say ein nazirut chala nazirut, it means if I say I'm going to be a nazir and then I say after that I'm going to be a nazir, we assume I meant one and the same thing and I'm only a nazir for 30 days. But if you do hold that I'm going to be a nazir for 60 days, minali, where are you going to get it from? To which they say, and this is, even though I said in the world of drasha, you can only darshan one thing from any given word or group of words, but there are ways to bypass that, okay? Halacha is made up of loopholes. When they get stuck in a situation like this and they want to learn 2 things from the same word, or in this case, 2 words, what do? They say, well, name kra lizol. The pasuk could have written nazir lizol and not lehazir. So my lehazir, why instead of saying like neder lindor would be the same as nazir lizol, okay? Why did it, often a nun just becomes a yud, okay? So now that's a whole grammar lesson. I'm not going to get into that, but there's a lot of roots that it becomes a nun and yud, like we'll switch like that. Anyway, my lehazil, shmat mina tarte, because it uses a hey instead of a yud, that hey is coming to teach something additional. So now we can darshan 2 things from there. Okay, so either we don't darshan nazirut chala nazirut at all according to that interpretation, or we can actually darshan both. Because this is an exception to the rule. We can darshan one from the hey and one from the double language, and we're good. Now we have to go back to, now we're going to go back to the option of lo dibra Torah kilashon b'nei adam. If we say lo dibra Torah kilashon b'nei adam, then what did we say? We're going to learn neder, lindor neder, That's already unnecessary, meant to be darshan. We learn yadot from there. The nazir lahazir, we learn nazirut chala nazirut. I'm going to end up having to do 2 naziruyot. So now they say the following. They tell us that in Israel, because we're in Babylonia here, we're in the Babylonian Talmud, they quote that in Israel, the ma'arava, that's a term they often use to talk about Eretz Israel, ambre, they say the following. Itana demafikle liyadot min lindor neder, like we just said. There are some who hold that lo dibra Torah klishom neder, we're going to learn it from lindor neder. The itana, but there's a different tana, that it's going to have a third option here. Demafikle min kol hayotze mipiv yaseh. What did we learn yesterday? We read this verse. It said, anything that comes out of your mouth, you have to keep. Now, anything that comes out of your mouth seems to imply even a yad. And that's a different way of interpreting, not from lindor neder, but from kechol hayotze mipiv yaseh. That's the end of that sugya. Now we're moving. Amar Mar is quoting something that was mentioned earlier. We, in the context of our discussion, we quoted this braita, and now we're going off on a tangent into that braita to understand. Nedarim over b'bal yachel u'bal ta'achel. So now it said, just like nedarim are bal yachel bal ta'achel, also nazirut. Again, bal yachel means don't desecrate your word, don't profane, right? Keep your word. And number 2, in a negative, don't not keep your word. And bal ta'achel, don't delay. So first we're going to talk about bal yachel, then we're going to move to bal ta'achel. Bishlam bal yachel de nedarim. What's a good example of bal yachel of nedarim? It's very simple. Kigon de amar, kikar zo ochal. You say, I'm going to eat this loaf of bread. V'lo achla, and then you don't eat it. So when you don't eat that loaf of bread, over mishum bal yachel dvaro, you didn't keep your word. That's very simple. Ela bal yachel de nazirut hecha mishkachala. But what does it mean to say I'm going to be a nazir and then you don't keep it? Kevan de amar hareini nazir, havale nazir. As soon as I say I'm going to nazir, I'm a nazir. Achal, as soon as I eat grapes that are forbidden to me, right? Anything that comes from the vine, or I drink wine. What did I do wrong though? At this point, it wasn't because I didn't keep my word. I'm responsible because it says about a nazir, don't eat grapes, don't drink wine. So achal kimle bebal yochal. You went against the negative commandment of don't eat grapes. That was a commandment given to the nazir. Shata kimle bebal yishteh. If you drink the wine, you're forbidden. You're liable for lo. Don't drink. So and not bal yachel. It's true you didn't keep your word, but that's not the issue here. The lo taseh associated in the Torah is don't eat, don't drink. That's what you did wrong. Again, don't eat grapes, don't drink wine. So Amar Rava lav or lav b'shnayim. Easy answer. You did 2 things wrong. In other words, you're going to get lashes twice. Okay, you're going to get punished double because you did 2 negative commandments, and that's a good answer. But this is going to be much more complicated. What's the kind of delay in nazirut that exists? Here's the question. If I say I'm going to be a nazir, I'm a nazir. As soon as I eat, now what do we mean to delay nazirut? You basically start eating grapes, and it's like not starting your nazirut, but that's not true. You started your nazirut, you just did something wrong, and then you're obligated because of bal yochal, okay, and not because of delaying your nazirut. That's not called delaying. That's called not doing what you said. So the first answer, there's going to be 5 answers. We're going to see 2 today. First answer, we're going to reject. If you say, I'm going to be a nazir when at some point in the future when I decide, to which they say, well, and then you delay it, to which they say, if you say when I want, well, you never set a date, so there is no delaying. It's when you want. That's not delaying. So if you say, I do not want to die before I become a nazir, meaning I want to be a nazir at some point before I die, you immediately become a nazir. And then if you don't, you've delayed. Because why have you delayed? Because you never know when you're going to die. So you should do it as soon as possible. And as long as you don't do it, you're basically delaying. And if you're not convinced by this, they want to give you an example of where this holds true as well. Midi tahave, omer liishto, just like it appears in this. Omer liishto, if somebody says to their wife, basically the husband doesn't want the wife to have to do yibum or chalitza with his brother. They don't have children. He says, listen, I'm giving you a get. This get will be valid an hour before I die, so that whenever I die, retroactively an hour before it will kick in. It's crazy you could do this, right? It will kick in and she'll be divorced rather than being a widow. And then she won't have to do yibum or chalitza. If she's married to a Kohen, she gets to eat truma. But this woman, if she's married to a Kohen, she can't ever eat truma now. Why? Immediately, because who knows, right? You never know when you're going to die. Right? We view life as you might die at any moment, and therefore, immediately she has to stop eating truma because maybe she'll have a get, and then it turns out she ate truma when she was really not married to him and not allowed to eat truma. Hachanami, we say the same thing here. We say immediately the nizirut should take effect because maybe you'll die and you won't end up doing the nizirut if you push it off and push it off. And that will be a case where there's baal ta'achir b'nizirut. If you don't really bring the nizirut upon yourself immediately after having made this statement, you're basically, every day that you push it off, you're transgressing baal ta'achir. So that's one possibility. So we've done 2, one we rejected, one we kept, and tomorrow we're going to see 3 more. Okay, for those who are new, I'll just tell you the way it works on Shabbos Dapim is that I put the daf up within about a half an hour after this daf goes up. So it's up online and you can listen to it on your own before Shabbat. And there's also a study guide. So if you're going to learn it on your own over Shabbat, you might want to print it before Shabbat and then you'll have it. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.